The first two items is we had two sets of minutes that we had never reviewed and approved. And the first one's for the 13th. And do I hear a motion to approve them?
So moved.
I'll second. That'd be Bill and Judy.
Any amendments, changes, or corrections? Who did you have, Bill, doing?
Bill did it. Yep.
All those in favor, ayes?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstained?
That's me.
Yeah. I have to abstain. I was-
We got 4 abstained, you got the 4 abstained there?
Not yet. Hayes,
Gordon,
Brian,
who's our,
Rich,
I think you were here for that one.
Rich,
I
and
was, yes.
Yeah.
For the 13th?
Can I half abstain? Half abstain?
Jen, and who else? That's it, okay.
all right, 20th. Do I hear a motion to,
I'll move it.
I'll second.
please, for a second?
I'm a good seconder.
All right, any discussion?
I have just one, on the paragraph that starts, the budget committee discussed, the next sentence, I think should indicate that was part of the discussion, but not a conclusion that the budget committee as a whole came to. The discussion included whether taxpayers can sustain a 9 to 10% increase.
I don't agree with that.
Well, we didn't vote
No,
on
we
that.
didn't vote
We
on
didn't
it though.
vote on
We
it,
didn't
but
vote
that
on
comment
it,
was
but-
surely
The
made.
comment
That
was
comment was
made.
made.
I agree, but I don't, I think the way it reads, it sounds like we voted and all agreed that that was
That was the discussion.
part of the discussion, yes, and I think it should reflect that as part of the discussion, not that we came to
So why
that
don't you just put
conclusion.
a comma and taxpayers cannot sustain. We discussed it and felt or something like that. Because it was certainly a consensus.
It was discussed that taxpayers cannot sustain a 9 to 10% increase.
No, I think people felt they couldn't sustain
We
it.
didn't get a sense of the meaning?
Well, we didn't,
Need a sense of it.
we didn't, we just, the subject came up with no,
Yeah, but there wasn't voted, so
No, there were-
technically she's correct,
That's
because there wasn't. a
somebody
vote.
may read it that the budget committee's gonna chop everybody down to 3.3%.
That's, yeah. that's-
Somebody will read it that way.
Somebody will go, what did you guys do?
All right,
How about
Thank
it
you.
were concerned?
Yes, that would be fine.
Is that your amendment?
That would be that would be fine.
You want to
There-
make that motion to amend it?
I would make the motion to amend it to say, there was a concern that taxpayers cannot sustain a 9 to 10%
I would
increase.
second that.
all right.
There was also Miss Greenway, not Miss Greenwood.
Oh, thank you.
I
That was my other
I
correction.
already corrected that.
Oh,
You're supposed to do those just to me.
I know, but I just found it on my desk here.
I was just making sure you're reading
Okay,
So do we vote on those?
we need to vote
Those in favor? Aye.
as amended.
As amended, correct.
Item.
Opposed? Abstained? Yeah. All right. Now, in the package that was emailed out, you had revised town spreadsheets. And they were, Gina asked me about sending them because there's some concern. This meeting tonight is about the school, presenting their budget or initial proposal to get us thinking school. And the intent is not to spend any time on the selectmen's revised budget, but to have it available for people to peruse at their leisure rather than just trying to digest it in one day before the meeting. So, just so that people know that the intent is to turn it over to the school for their initial presentation and get people thinking school.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think you have a sheet that looks like this. It says 26 line budget highlights. And maybe on the back, or there may be a second sheet that just says the big takeaways.
Takeaway did not come in.
Not me. That did
No,
not come
you
through.
you told me you were bringing those
Oh,
copies.
okay, I did bring some.
Okay.
Well, this way we'll have to listen to you rather than look at it.
Well,
Well, the big takeaways are in big print, you want to-
Well, this
We
is
can share.
how I see it.
You're gonna need one? There you go.
Whoa, big.
I don't know.
So and this is one of the budgets probably in my career that I feel more comfortable bringing. I used to be really happy 20 years ago if I had a budget that was under 10%. And this one, as a whole, is 4.7 as it stands right now. And if we make the adjustments for the new expenses involved with the bond issue that was approved last year, the actual increase in the budget itself is 1.9%. When we look at the list that's on there, the first four items are kind of general, and I'll go through those. After that, I try to compare them, that's a revenue sheet that we got, yeah. Did they have this one?
Yep.
Okay. This is, I created this to try to model what Dick brought to me last year as a way that he thought it was better, easier for the committee to understand the budget. So I agreed. And so this is how I tried to organize it. After number 5, we'll start to follow these categories. But the first issue really is a quick history. We started way back in October, like schools always have to do, and we're trying to project pretty much a full 12 months ahead of what our needs are going to be. We completed our first draft early October. We've revised it 3 times administratively and at the board level since. Currently, our tuitions are based on the same number of high school students who are graduating from our 8th grade as are graduating from 12th grade. So our numbers right now, and you know this is a number that always can change, but right now it looks like we'll have the same number of kids on a tuition basis in high school. Our current tuitions, the number that we use, we added 2.5% to a current. I have some indication from Hanover that their tuition might actually go down a little bit. So we're feeling that we're pretty safe at the 2.5, to be pretty close to right on. In this budget, there is no use of the high school trust fund. We've tried to, I very much like not to use trust funds unless we need to use trust funds. And I know that fund at one point was way overfunded, and so we used some to try to get that more to a reasonable level. We're kind of in a good place right now, I think. We have room to use them if we need to, but I think, you know, we're kind of where we should be.
What's,
The other,
I have a question
sure,
on the trust fund.
Yeah.
Can you provide the balances of that?
yes,
We have this
yes.
sheet actually.
We have a
Yep,
sheet.
they should
At the
be.
very end of the package.
And you should have the one that's updated with the article that you approved last year for use of fund balance.
Yeah, I didn't bring that.
The high school is
Very last
461.
page in the packet.
461?
461,007 to be exact.
Okay, and so, well, we can come back to that.
Yeah, we'll come back to trust. When you get into trust, I'm gonna turn it over to Janet because she's the expert when it comes to the trust. Number 4 is there are no new educational programs or positions that have been added or deleted. The staffing is exactly as it has been this year, and as it was approved, I think maybe 2 years ago now, by a community vote to increase the budget to fund some positions that we had been looking at. The one change that will be in the budget around positions is the superintendent's position. I will be retiring at the end of June, and there is a search that's active right now for a replacement. And that person, I kind of came on as an independent contractor in a way. I do not take any benefits, or retirement, or any of those things. It's FICA that comes out, and, the Medicaid payment comes out of my salary, but other than that, I'm simply a salaried person, 0.6 FTE. Actually, 156 days is the way my contract reads. The new person will have to have an employee contract as a part-time superintendent, again at 0.6, but we have to budget for benefits and those kinds of things. So that changed a little bit. So when we get to number 5, that relates to the first category on this sheet, which is the administrative grouping. And that pulls from the budget from the school board column, from the school building administration column, and the SAU. So the breakdown for those 3 pieces are pulled together under administration. And that's the one that the only real change in people will be that superintendent.
What is the health benefit change?
So-
9.9% increase.
But what is it?
What
Is
is
it a change of benefit or just change of
Oh,
number?
just change your rate,
Oh.
yeah. Yeah. So, in the administration, the changes are the superintendent's salary benefit. We also had a increase in the principal's salary that was beyond what had been budgeted last year, so that has to be included. And we had increased last year the SAU assistant to a full-time position, and that came with some benefits. So are slight increases in those categories. Number 6, the high school has a decrease because primarily the end of a out-of-district special ed student who has graduated and moved on. And so that big decrease comes in that category. The other decrease really, because there's a slight decrease in regular high school tuition also. That's primarily because we have fewer students accessing the Career and Tech Center. So that the Career Center tuition amount is going to be less because we have less access. It's not being used as much. Let's see.
What does CBA mean?
Pardon me?
CBA?
CBA.
Collective
The
Bargaining
CBA
Agreement.
is our negotiated contract with our teachers association. And those negotiated benefits, which were again approved last March by the town, have been incorporated. Probably, other than the standard increase, we've had 6 staff members move in tracks. So they go, for example, instead of being at BA 15, they moved over a track on their salary scale to BA 30 because they took a couple of graduate courses, and that puts them at a higher salary level. The other category kind of pulls together a number of things. In that is the buildings and grounds, transportation, debt service. Buildings and grounds pretty much is totally stable without any increases. we've tried really hard because of the bond to not increase our ordinary expenses in those categories in respect for that effort by the town to do the improvements to the building that needed to be done. And just the fact that those improvements are happening makes it a very reasonable thing. So we're taking care of, material supplies, basic repairs, our service contracts, all those kinds of things are still there. That service changed because of the bond primarily, and the new bond. And if you want, Janet can explain how all of those bonds, because you have a couple of others pre-existing, what their timeline is, and what that looks like, and how that's also affecting that budget line.
I'll pass around a sheet.
And finally, it's food service, and I don't know if any of you folks were able to purchase a pie for Thanksgiving from the school, but our new chef has had been in her past a instructor at King Arthur Culinary, and she was a instructor, a pastry instructor there. She served up some really fine pies for Thanksgiving. And the other thing that's really, the decision was made by the school board last year and then approved by the town to move to our own chef and get rid of the service we had. The quality of food that we were receiving for our children was horrible. It was basically heat and serve. It was mostly deep fried, and even though our contracts had demanded more fresh fruit and vegetables and more things prepared at school, the company that the only company that actually responded to our bid, an RFP, just doesn't perform. So we made the decision to change. Our participation has gone up tremendously by students. I think there are a couple of parents around this table who might be able to say something about that, but I've eaten school lunch every day I've been in the building this year. And so I can personally, after over 50 years of eating school lunches, tell you these are some of the best that I've ever had. So I'm really proud of that program, but it doesn't come cheap.
Question to
Sure.
dealing with it. There's a line in the expense for food service
Yes.
transfer. And I looked at it, and I think they're about the same. Now, don't we have much greater revenue now with more people eating?
We do, our revenue has gone up. We had expected it, we had hoped it would go as high as 115,000 this year. That's how we had budgeted last year. I don't think we're gonna quite get there, but we're way up from the year before, which I think was in the 70s. Our daily lunches served are a little over 100 out of 190 kids, so.
You get 50%.
Over, yeah. And we have a lot of kids going back, to some families' chagrin, for seconds and thirds. So on those days, it can be pretty expensive in some households. We try to monitor that for families and keep that under control, but, yeah, the food's good. So.
Because to me, the net is the thing we have to consider.
Right, and you will see that there, the contribution for food service to the program will go up, and that's, there's a number of reasons. We have, about 1.5 staff, a full-time chef and a half-time assistant. And Janet has permission to correct me at any time if I get one of these numbers wrong. But also we had to completely restock that kitchen with all of the basic items, all of the spices, oils, flour, all that kind of stuff. So, there was an initial expense that was pretty high. And so we, you know, yes, we've generated more sales, but the costs have also gone up. And we're probably gonna have to adjust our price, going forward. We're at $5.25 for an adult, I think $4.25.
That's right, student.
Per student, and, that's a pretty good deal. I'll tell you, it's a good deal as an adult, for sure.
Better than going across the street to Stella's, for example.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Bill?
So that's kind of the gist of
Frank.
of the main budget.
Frank?
Yes.
Yeah. Bill, you have a question?
When you were on the debt service, could you explain the interest expense
I,
for 2025?
yes, I'm gonna have Janet explain that sheet, because she created it and did a lot of work on it. Yeah, she's gonna,
So, I'm not sure which part you're looking at, or you
I'm
have a
looking at the
question
2025 bond issue, and there's an interest expense, but no principal for 2025, but there is for 2026. I'm just curious why there's no
Oh,
principal.
because when we were doing the budget last year for FY '25, the bond had not been approved yet by the town. And there was a bond schedule of fees that was sent out by the bond bank. And that very first year only had an interest payment on it, no principal payment. So that 64,000 was the interest payment that was, sent on the amortization schedule from the bond bank. And it wasn't until March that the bond was approved by the town. But the 64,000 is the initial payment. And that was in this year's budget.
Why is the interest half as much in 26?
Why is it half as much in '26? Well, because that's the schedule that they sent out, that follows the amortization schedule. That goes with the bond.
I guess I'm lost here.
Yeah.
You didn't
So we're
take
not
any-
taking the money until August, so the August, money didn't come until August.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm following up on both aspects here.
Yep.
Why is there no principal payment in 2025?
Because the amortization schedule that came from the New Hampshire Bond Bank for year one was only a payment for interest only, no principal. Because the bond had to be approved by the town first, before there was any principal applied.
Does
But
the
you had to
timing,
pay interest, I don't get, how
does
could
the
you pay
timing of the
interest but not?
school year make a difference in this? Is that why it's ahead? The first year, there's no payment essentially, but the next second year there is. Because of the July to June.
Yes, because we wouldn't get the funds,
Right.
yes,
It's just the way the bond bank schedules things, this is the best.
right.
Right,
Well, that's wonderful.
It may not be logical, but it's what they did.
and because the
So-
school year is different though.
Did you put it out to bid, I guess? I mean, or you only have one
So we-
source of funds, or what is it?
No, we went to a couple different places and looked for funds, and that was presented at the annual meeting last year. And this was the best, interest rate that was provided.
But what I don't understand is the principal outstanding in 26 must be pretty close to the full amount, and the interest dropped by over 50%. That's what I don't understand.
So I can bring the bond schedule, the amortization schedule for you at the next meeting, if you'd like me to do that. That is just what was in the schedule itself, for the payments that are due for
Are
FY
there
'26.
expenses in the interest for the first year?
Are
The
there-
64,000?
So I'm not sure what you mean by that, but we paid that 64,000 as a payment for January. That's coming up this January to the bond bank.
So it's for like 9 months, it's an interest payment for like 9 months. You booked it
Right.
in March.
Yeah, but there may be a processing fee
26 would be for
incorporated in
12
that
months
for
instead
setting
of
up the
as
bonds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm,
Usually the underwriter takes a cut off the top.
Yeah.
This is the
Wow.
municipal, well, this is the municipal bond bank,
Right.
and all I can say is they do things differently than a mortgage or a loan. But I can't tell you
Yes,
any
they are.
more than that.
Right,
But
I think what they do is they
the schedule
project,
would help for people to see, I think,
Okay.
next time.
sure, I can bring that next
I
time.
think we put it in the
Send it
town
to me.
report, all the bond schedules
Yeah, we do.
usually.
And so this was a 10-year bond?
Yes, it was voted on for 10 years, so they did have a choice of a 20-year or 10-year, and the school decided to go with a 10-year because they had significant savings in interest payments over the length of the note. It saved a lot of money.
It was a 2.72 interest rate for the 10-year, it was a 3.4% interest rate for the 20-year.
Are the principal payments even payments?
No, they vary every year, as do the interest payments.
It
But
must
it's
be like
fairly
a
stable as a
mortgage
unit
amortization.
each year.
Some debt financing is constant principal change in
Yeah.
interest. That's why I asked the question.
Right, the interest is paid more upfront than,
Yeah, but this is paying down more than 10% of the principal in FY '26, right? 294 is more than 10% of 2.5 million.
and those payments vary. So there's
I understand.
one principal payment made each year, and that's typically in July.
And what's your, do these numbers add up to like a whole round number or something? Like three
The total
something?
bond, you mean, two
Yeah,
point
interest
five nine
plus,
nine?
interest plus.
I can bring that next time. I'll
Yeah,
bring
bring it
this
next
in.
time, cause
I mean, the best thing to do is look at the
Make
actual
those
schedule
Yep.
that they gave us rather than try to speculate how they came up with their numbers.
It is.
Let's put that on our to-do list and send that out.
Thank you.
Sure,
Thank you.
So we went 5 years to get what,
Yep.
1.7% instead of 3 point something?
10 years.
10 years.
Two point seven two versus 3.4.
Yeah.
2.72.
Knowing this town will be ready for another bond in 10 years.
We'll both bonds be retired at the same time.
Yes.
I can tell you, Dick, I won't be here to defend it.
I don't,
And you are.
So
I
a
think I've
couple,
gotten to the point where I probably won't be either.
so a couple other things, just to quick bring to your attention. Number 9, health insurance, that increase was at 9.9%. We were actually very relieved that it was only 9.9% because there are horror stories out there about where health insurance is going. So we were able to maintain the same coverage we provided our employees over the years with that increase. It in itself, though, is not cheap. It's equivalent to 1.7% of the 4.7 increase. So it's a big expense.
Jordan?
1.7% of the total budget, Frank, or?
No, not the total budget, of the 4.7 increase, of the total increase in the budget.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think what you're trying to say, it's 1.7 over to almost $10 million.
No, sorry. And then total cost of food service is $207,500, and we're hoping that next year, we will have that revenue up to about $116,000. And that will mean we'll need to do a transfer of $91,500. That's up because this year we have a transfer projected of $65,000, which we think is gonna be short. We're gonna have to probably transfer more than that in reality, so that's one area we'll have to make up from other parts of the budget. So, you know, way better food, healthier food, kids enjoy it, it's, participation is up, but it is costing us more money to do. We're also buying as much local as we can, and as much supporting local farmers and things like that as well. So there's a sensitivity to that, that aspect. If we could switch quickly just to the revenues, and the summary on revenues. To me, this is where the bad news is in the budget. The amount for appropriations that you're gonna have to raise through local taxes will increase by $599,099. This is a projection at this point, because tax rates aren't set, and there's a whole lot of stuff that goes goes into actual tax study. So these are our best estimates. And if we have a sufficient fund balance at the end of the year to offset taxes, this number comes down as well. So, we don't really always know. We'll probably bring you an article to allow us to reduce fund balance, or reduce taxes with use of some of the fund balance in the event it materializes.
I have a question for Dick, actually. Dick, can you explain the process by which we spend money, either the town or the school spends money, versus the revenue it collects and how that comes out in the net? Because we don't actually budget net, we budget gross.
Right.
And
Well,
then,
all right, let me-
I want you to bring that back home.
All right, when you're dealing with government funding, whatever level you're dealing with, you have in your outgoing part of the budget, i.e. what you spend, you have authorization, and then you have appropriation in the federal government. And they're two separate things for the feds. But for the town, they're combined in a single vote. That's why you see the raise and appropriate in the money articles. And that is the maximum amount of money that can be spent. It doesn't matter if the income goes up or down, that's the amount of money you can spend. And they're combined. Now, the reason I bring up the difference is you'll hear with the congressman saying how they just authorized building, a new bridge across the Connecticut. But then they never appropriated any money to pay for it. And that's just the way they play politics with the federal budget. But we don't do that here, we only vote once. Now, when it comes to revenues, the revenues are, you estimate what you think you're gonna get. We never vote on the revenues. The revenues are whatever we can get. If we get more, great. If we get less, too bad. But we revise the projection of our revenues in September when we go to set the tax rate. So it's important to know revenues, yes, we wanna look at it at the budget committee, because obviously if the expenses go up, let's say for the trash, which is an easy one to do, if it gets to too high, we're gonna have to increase how much we charge for the plastic bags to throw away the garbage, to make it more self-sustaining. Well, the school's doing the same thing with lunch program. If they get more people buying lunch, they get more revenues, but we don't vote on the revenue. We only vote on the expense side of it. Do people understand that?
And when DRA sets the tax rate, do they look at revenue or do they just look at expense?
They're given a revised revenue forecast from the selectmen, usually through about the end of September. They revise it again over what we see right now, to be closer to what it really is
And that
going to be.
includes the school revenue projection too as well.
And the school, I think, you go to the Department of Education.
No, they go to the
DRA does it now?
But it's separate from the town.
Yeah,
They're
it's
both
separate
done
from the town.
separately.
But they have the same type of thing. They give a revised estimate of revenue. If you look at the title of the form, it says that. They have one that goes in the town report when we vote on it, and then they have a revised one when it comes time to set the tax rate.
So in essence, we can't spend more than the authorization for the expense budget.
Right.
But DRA will set the tax rate independently of that appropriation, because they're gonna look at some revenue estimate.
No, you're gonna take the revenue to reduce the appropriation amount that has to be raised by taxes.
Okay, all right, that's a better way, but the net of it is that DRA will consider revenue when
Oh,
they
yeah.
set the tax rate. It's not, we're not always gonna, our taxes aren't gonna be a complete function of what we approve at town meeting for expense.
That is correct. And now there's another factor that comes into it, which you alluded to, and that is what they call your undesignated fund balance. In other words, if you don't spend all the money that was appropriated, you can basically use, even though theoretically you raise it, then you can use it to lower taxes.
In the next year, yeah,
For the
essentially
next
you
year.
give it back.
Not that year, but the next year.
Right, so it's rollover,
Yeah.
basically, okay.
Unless it goes into trust fund balances, right?
Well, you can go different ways with that, whatever is left on. In other words, if we appropriate a total of 10 million for the town, 7 for the school and 3 for the town, and the school spends 6.9, they got $100,000 left. You can either roll it over to lower the taxes the next year, or you can, if we vote on it, it can go into one of the trust funds. When it comes to the town portion, if they spend 2.9 of the 3 million that was approved at town meeting, the selectmen can take it immediately to lower taxes. We can vote to lower taxes, or we can vote the next year to use that money for specific projects, which we did a number of years ago. We'd have an article in the town report to put new doors on the firehouse, for example, using the fund balance. Did I mess it up, Judy?
Not that clear, not that easy.
It was good, no,
Yeah.
it's just, usually it goes from the town side, it goes into the fund balance, and then some years it can help offset taxes, other years it may go by vote to a specific project, or as in this fall, when the tax rate was set, the fund balance was sufficiently low that it had to stay in the fund balance, we couldn't use it for anything else.
Now, there's one exception with the town, with the fund balance. If we have a bridge washout, if we have fund balance to pay for the new bridge, we can just get the court to approve it. We don't have to have a special town meeting. If we didn't have a fund balance and we wanted to replace the bridge, we'd have to have a special town meeting to vote appropriation.
Yeah, to raise the money.
And one of the differences with the school is I think you're allowed to carry a certain amount of money in fund balance
We're
from
allowed
year
to
to
carry
year.
whatever we have.
The school cannot, we
Yeah.
have to zero out one way or another
Yeah.
at the end of each year.
Right.
Uh,
Thanks, Dick.
So the other, I think the important things on the revenue side is the preliminary indications we have been given are that the state education tax, your SWEP, is probably gonna increase, and they estimate that to be about 82,000. Our adequacy aid, they're saying, is going down. And that's a complicated formula, takes into account special education numbers, free and reduced, all kinds of things. When you look at that spreadsheet, it goes like this. But in total, that looks to be going down. So when we have smaller amounts of state aid coming in, that means that's gonna raise your appropriation piece of that, so that locally that'll have to be picked up. The same is with our vocational aid. Our vocational aid is based on how many students go to the career tech centers and what our expenses are, and we know that number of students are down, so that aid is going down. And as I mentioned, our food transfer is gonna go up, so, our sales are gonna go up, but the transfer is up, that offsets that this year, so. Anyway, there are the highlights. The big takeaways are on the, to really summarize that, really are that after the bond, the budget is up 1.1%. Our state revenues overall are gonna be down. Our health insurance is up. Our new contract is in its first year, and there were some impacts from that. And that no educational programs or positions have changed. That's it. From that, Dick, I will let you open it for questions or see how you would like to proceed. You wanna get into the weeds on any of this, or?
I think like most of us, we were happy to see that it was down at 4.75 instead of 10.
Yeah, we were.
And that just was enough of a shock that But one thing I would like, which I don't think we've gotten any report on, we passed that bond issue that had a number of improvements.
Right.
Now, I have seen the new siding, but what's the status of the other projects that are going on
Okay.
as part of that bond?
Okay, so right now, the final drawings for bid are being finalized, and Ekman, it will be going out for bids on the rest of it this month, by the end of this month. So that has moved along right on schedule, and we'll see how the bids come back and how it matches up with what we're hoping to get done. But yeah, it's on schedule, and they're doing the final design drawings for bidding at the moment.
Now, was my impression right when I was in the school, it looked as though you'd poured some epoxy over the bad tile down there?
Not that I am aware of, nothing new that I'm aware of.
Maybe it was just freshly
I don't
waxed.
know. I don't know, I don't think so.
I don't
All
think
right.
so.
Yeah.
It may have been a
Because
year
I
ago.
remember pouring the epoxy on ships over.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we had some bad spots that I know, I think the year before they had covered and filled.
All right, so basically, the only part of the project that's actually been accomplished already is the external siding on the plain school.
Removal of all that lead, yeah.
And the new door,
The
right?
entryway.
The new
And-
door,
Oh.
entry.
Oh, the security project was done with the new front doors, and you have to do a double lock to get in now. And there's a window to the main office.
Into the office there,
Yeah,
all right,
yeah.
I should have mentioned that.
Yeah,
That was not part of the bond, though.
No,
That
that
was a
was not part
separate
of that,
grant
was
that
separate.
Frank had gotten for.
All right.
The school had to be used up by the end of this year.
Now, how did you come out at the end of last year? You had some funds left over also, didn't you?
We did have
We did.
quite a bit, yes, and I didn't bring the detail, but I can tell you that, last year in the vote, there was an article for $100,000 to go into maintenance building trust of fund balance, and that was satisfied, so that has happened. And we were also able to apply $72,221 to reduce taxes this year. So, and the rest of it was spent on budgetary items that were already in the system.
So we had 170,000 roughly that went into trust funds.
Yeah, 100,000 went into trust funds and 72,000 went to reduce taxes
And for the
for this
portion of-
year.
that was going into the building trust fund, was that then withdrawn for any parts of the project, or is that just?
No. No, that's actually included in your trust fund balance report that you have there, that 100,000 is in the top line, you can see it.
and that trust fund, from my point of view, is really reserved for, we lose a boiler, or we have a failure in a roof, that's unexpected or something like that, to cover those big things that happen.
They've happened.
And they happen, yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
Do you have a policy on what percentage of the trust fund should be of expense, or how do you come up with what's an appropriate fund balance?
I think what we've done is that we've had discussions on each of these at the board meetings to try to make sure that each of them are sufficient for a major occurrence. And it's harder, probably the building one is the hardest one, because those costs are really hard to predict. With the educational, the special education fund, we try to be prepared to cover at least one out-of-district placement for a year, and maybe a high needs placement locally at our own school that may require a lot of extra services. And that gives us the year to then gradually build that into a budgetary item for the future. But yeah, they're really based on board discussions about what people think are reasonable levels to maintain them.
Can you document those in some ways, or?
Well, they're in the minutes, they would be in the minutes of those meetings,
Yeah.
those conversations.
I can tell you, the school enrollment probably needs to come up a little bit, cause it should cover a teacher and benefits
Right.
if we have to split a class. And that doesn't quite cover it.
Right.
Special education is about where it should be. In past years, we would have said it could have been a little bit lower, but Frank, my understanding is we're getting less aid from the state
Right.
and costs are going up,
Yep.
so it's about where it should be. High school tuition is around where we think it should be as well, but that's,
And how did you decide it was about where it should be?
I'm gonna leave that
I think it's 20 students
20
at
students.
Hanover rate.
At the Hanover rate.
So you would expect in 1 year a change of 20 students, is that what that means?
No, I think they figured that number of students for an increase of a certain number of students for a 4-year period, even though we would be building that back into the budget going forward.
So it would be 20 divided by 4 or something?
I'm not sure what the amount is.
For Hanover?
Yeah,
I
what's the
think
amount?
Hanover is 24,000. Oh, of the trust fund?
Maybe 20
It's,
times
uh,
4, excuse me.
461,000.
Yeah, so that's
Yeah,
about
it's about
20 kids.
20,000 a year,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, that's right, that's 5 students for 4 years, right?
Right.
Yeah,
That's how you should calculate it.
yeah.
The highest swing we've had is 11 in 1 year, at least since I've been here.
Yeah,
So-
thank you.
I'd just like to comment, or follow up on those questions here, is that since my kids were in the school and they're now sophomores in college, we've had approximately $500,000 in the high school trust fund with the intent of spending that down when, maybe 6 or 8 years ago, there was this surge of students going through. And yet, it's barely any different than it was 10 years ago, and I'm just wondering what or it's good to hear that there is some argument for it, but there is a lot of money, $1.2 million between all these trust funds. And yes, it's nice to have, very few other towns in the state have anything similar to it, and so I just wonder can we take a look at, which of these are really nice to have versus which do we really need?
The real issue with a lot of that is that they are very limited in how they can be used. So we might have a lot of money in high school trust and nothing in special ed, and if we had the need for special ed, we can't take it out of the other fund. So I think that's the limiting factor. So when we've looked at each of those areas, because they are carefully limited and controlled on how it can be used, what would be the worst case that we want to be prepared for, or what level do we want for preparation in each category? And that's we have been trying to bring that high school one down, because we agreed that that had been too high. We think we're closer to a more reasonable level now than we were, although there is some room there. I would agree to that as well.
But
The
didn't we
others, I think,
use-
are pretty tight.
We used part of the high school trust fund, was it 2 years ago?
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Well,
the-
it is one family with 3 kids to come in and all of a sudden, boom.
Yeah, yeah.
So the other thing about the high school trust is that you really have to plan ahead. So it's at this stage in the process where you would plan to use the high school trust. And there have been years that we have planned to use 100,000 out of high school trust, but you have to have a deficit in that line in order to make it happen. And then there was a population change in high school, and we never had achieved the deficit, so we couldn't do the transfer.
Right, that's my recollection, is there
Yes,
were a
so
lot of
those
years
things actually
where-
happen,
where we're
yeah.
trying to spend it down, and then I get to school district meeting every year, and the balance hasn't changed. And it's like, wait, what happened to the plan to draw down the trust? So that's,
There was enough money in the budget that we didn't need it.
right, so why are we approving that much in the budget?
That's the question.
What position does DRA take on fund balances?
Trust funds, they don't take a position as far as I know. They do on fund, they do take a look at your undesignated fund balance.
Right, general fund.
Do they just say that that should be a percentage of your average budget over some number of years? Like, how do they
They
say what
used
the
to say
undesignated fund should be?
7.5 to 12% of your total appropriations of town, school, and county
Okay,
into the undesignated.
into the undesignated fund
The
balance.
others, I don't think.
Now they're going at, I think, about 5%, aren't they, is their
Yes.
recommendation?
Yes,
Do you know who's best?
cause
They-
ours
DRA
is,
is
they
at
want you to
5.
have above 5%.
Yeah, and the municipal accounting board had a 7.5 to 15% recommendation, I
Well, the
believe.
select board has a policy.
And the select board has a
And it goes
policy.
7 to 12%
Yeah,
in that range.
which is closer to the Municipal Accounting Standards Board, rather
Got
than
it.
GRA.
And the other trust funds, they have no,
They don't, yeah, that's just
No
not
say.
But you need that money in case some disaster happens. Because otherwise you'd have to have a special town meeting. And I think
Right, but
we've
the
used it
disast,
once.
but what the disasters aren't defined. Right, you, like you were saying earlier, if a
Something
bridge
like a bridge
washed out,
washes
we could
out.
go to a court, and that court would be able to say, yes, town of Lyme, you can use your undesignated
We
fund
we
balance,
used it
but
once,
there must be
Judy,
some.
what was it that cost
Yes,
us to use
it
it?
can be almost any
I don't remember,
emergency.
Dick, it was
Like
a long
FEMA
time
type
ago.
It has to be an emergency,
Yes.
correct.
And you have
You
to,
could lose a
sometimes it's a
road
legal
or
fee,
A
or it's
legal fee, you could
road,
get sued and you have to come up with.
Uh-huh,
Uncle River Road
$200,000.
decides to test the dam at
Is-
Springfield.
but
And if you have the money, getting Superior Court approval, you can get in like 24 hours, one judge can sign off.
Yeah,
Does the
So it's
same-
very quick to get the money released.
Does the same procedure follow for the school fund balance?
we don't keep one.
No.
The school
don't
doesn't
have
get.
one.
The
This is
school
what-
doesn't have an undesignated
That's-
fund
I-
balance.
Okay,
If
I
this-
was getting the two
Right.
If the school had surplus that they did not utilize because they didn't need it or it wasn't designated at the prior town meeting, it would go to the undesignated fund.
It goes into the town under
Balance.
the fund
And then
balance.
it's up to the select board what to do with it.
Which is why they base the undesignated fund balance recommendation on the total of county, school, and local
Yep.
tax raising.
Which in a way justifies a higher fund balance on the specific funds for the school than might otherwise be appropriate.
We
Because you
do-
don't have an undesignated fund balance to pull from.
Right, we can't take this, the full of the 1.2 million and apply it to just one area. We have-
That's my point, thank you.
If we do wanna take money out of a trust, we have to go through a hearing process. We're not able to just simply remove that money.
Or you can do it by a vote at the school district meeting,
Absolutely, yeah.
which is what we do in the town every year. We vote to put so much in and take so much out of the trust funds for the town.
But if it's not done, then, as you said, it has to be done on other basis of the
If-
procedure.
There are
For the
some.
funds that the school board is designated agent for,
Right.
if they are not designated agent for the fund, it has to be a vote at the district meeting.
Same with the town.
So you
And
have
the
to have a
same with the
special
town.
meeting.
And all of these funds, the school is the designated agent,
Yeah.
right? Yep.
As
We
the-
went through that a number of years ago, designating agents. I mean, the first one we did was the bridge fund.
Thanks.
And now most of them have the select board or the school board as a designated agent, but they have to have a public hearing before they can take the money out. Did I mess things up, Judy?
No,
Jump on me when I mess things up.
I'll whack it.
Yeah.
I think that's good.
Now, do we have any questions now from the board, either about the school? Let's do the school. Do we, yes, Rich?
So, thank you for coming and giving this clear presentation. I really like the cliff notes, one pager, that really helped. I'm gonna ask for some help to explain what's going on when people ask me, wait, you're on the budget committee. When I look at a $9.5 million budget, and I divide it by, I'm gonna call it 300 students, it comes out around a little south of $32,000. There are other schools around, I tracked down Hanover and Crossroads, that are considerably less, several $1,000s less per student. Now, I'm probably mixing and matching things, but other people are gonna find these same numbers, and how can I explain what makes the Lyme budget, the Lyme school budget, different from these other institutions? And why would there be that much of a difference between Hanover or Crossroads and the Lyme school?
So there's a lot of factors that can go into that.
Yes.
One is when you're dividing by a student count.
Mhm.
For example, we could take this same budget
Right,
and we could add 2 or 3 kids to each of our classrooms without having to add any staff, and that would lower that average cost.
yes.
We have very advantageous class sizes for most of our groups. And I think that's one piece of it. We also have a very solid program for kids. We have a lot of I wanna call them extra, we have a lot of opportunities that some other schools do not have. Whether it's our design lab, for STEM exposure for kids, or world language, K, not K, I don't know if we do it in K, but at least grade 1 through 8, things of that sort. We have a middle school model that we use rather than self-contained classrooms. That adds to the number of staff so that you can have curriculum area specialists that support that. We have a lot of support for kids who are struggling, who need remediation help in the early grades. We think that saves us money on the special ed end and the 504 end of special needs students later on. So there are things like that, I think, that are, Lyme has always put a high value on highly qualified staff members, and you pay well. There's no question that you pay well, you have good benefit packages, and that you, as a town, you value your educators. So I think those things kind of all sort of come together, and that's how you get that number.
All right, and as I have 2 teachers in my family, my daughter and her husband are both teachers, and thank you for paying your students, your staff well.
Yeah, we try. My town too. We Plainfield, I live in Plainfield, we like to compete with you guys. Our scores are a little lower, so I think we have to increase our investments down there or do something, I'm not sure what, but.
But doesn't Hanover, they have a very good school system also.
Yes, they do, and they pay very well as well. I
What
don't know.
What is the cost per student in Hanover versus Lyme?
I looked on the website, and Hanover High School students are 23.4. Is that, I mean,
One
tell,
issue, sorry.
tell
one
me if
issue.
I'm missing the
Yeah.
point. I mean, these are just numbers I picked off the web someplace, so, you know, they may be misinterpreting the data.
Yeah, it depends, and Jen knows this really well, it depends on how you calculate that. If you take the gross budget and divide it by the number of students, you get one number.
Right.
If you go to the state website and pull out, well, what is the approved tuition, they've made adjustments in those numbers
Okay.
and taken some things out, so that would lower it. I mean, you gotta do apples to apples if you're gonna,
Right,
however you
and
do
these
it.
numbers, the numbers
Yeah.
that I found probably aren't apples to apples,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
that's,
they
yeah.
take transportation and food service out. The state tends to take the kinds of costs that might vary per district that don't like reflect necessarily curriculum or the building needs. Transportation can be really expensive in a town because it's rural, as opposed to, a more, there are a lot of urban areas in New Hampshire, but,
Mhm, mhm.
The number of like, we need 2 buses in Lyme, right? And but neither of those buses are full of kids, right? It's just because of the land area
Yep.
that needs to be
Yep.
covered in during morning and afternoon. So those types of things they tend to take out. Our cost per student it is higher than Hanover's, even when you look at the apples to apples comparison. And largely, I think that's derived from the fact that it's expensive to run a small district, right? We're just
So
one
you've
school.
talked about the SAU cost.
Sure, yeah, like the
That's-
SAU costs for Hanover sort of spread across 3 schools. Hanover also gets tuition revenue that isn't, I'm not sure how the state accounts for that, but that's on the revenue side, right?
Right.
And so that's a big deal for Hanover, that helps
Yep.
them control their costs
Interesting.
to some extent, and it's gonna impact that. The cost per pupil for the number of kids that are actually residents in Hanover.
Okay.
I think a classic example is, I remember that I was in a city, and they consolidated all the sixth grades in the city in the old junior high. And we had 20 sixth grades, each one of them had 25 students, with the exception of one that had 22. In other words, they were able to balance across the board the students in a class. They didn't have any classes with only 16 students. That makes a big difference.
I have a question.
Sure.
If we talked about, instead of looking at cost per student, we looked at cost per classroom, where would we come out?
Boy, that'd be hard to get the figures, I think.
Well, I'm not,
Yeah.
you put them together one year, Jen, I remember.
Well, not cost per classroom, that would be very hard to do, and we could do it in Lyme, but we wouldn't have a comparator.
Yeah.
We would have to ask those other districts to prepare those numbers
Right.
for us, and the likelihood would be very low that that would happen.
Yeah,
And then you'd have to also
Manchester's
go
not
back
gonna do that for us.
Well, yeah, at Manchester, we would never wanna compare ourselves to
No.
Manchester,
No,
right?
but
It's
the
like a
school that I
completely
went to
different
is more
beast.
comparable to the Manchester situation.
Yeah, but I mean, I think like for our region, we're highly comparable to Plainfield, right? Like that's probably, I think, the best, they have a K-8 school. Demographically, they look a lot like Lyme. I think the household income is maybe lower, but I would, at this point, describe it as marginally lower.
Becoming more affluent every day.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the Upper Valley. Grantham starts to look similar, but they're running a K-6 school as opposed to a K-8. A big difference for Plainfield is that they tuition all their kids to one school, and that one school is Lebanon, and they negotiate the rate with Grantham. So in a lot of ways, Plainfield has made a lot of different changes since I'd say like 2018, 2017. They merged their business office with Cornish. They started doing a lot of programming, sort of shares with Grantham. And now they're talking about, I think what's gonna happen in the next couple of years is that Cornish and Plainfield are not gonna even have two schools anymore. They're gonna somehow figure out
The
how to
middle
merge
school's
to
gonna
one.
merge pretty quickly, I think.
Yeah,
I think there'll probably be, there may be a vote this March.
I think
Yeah.
that is gonna be on their march, and they voted for it, they voted it down before, but I think that, you know, at this point, costs, and not only the cost, but the number of kids, in particular in the Cornish school, is very low. And it's making that school very expensive to
And
run.
where that real advantage is with them is, goes back to the point I made about class sizes, number of kids in a room. They have the same configuration. They have a math teacher, science teacher, English language arts teacher, one other, whatever, and mathematics, I guess. But, you know, with 3 grades, 6, 7, and 8. And so where they might have been a self-contained room with 20 kids, now you've got those kids spread over. So by bringing in bringing the Cornish and Plainfield together, they're gonna get a better efficiency out of those same 4 teachers. So, anyway, that's kind of.
So I guess my follow-up question really was thinking about the number of kids per classroom or the number of classrooms per school and so forth. And the other part of sharing administrative costs, like you mentioned in Plainfield, of course. What is the school board doing to look at those kinds of collaboration, to see what type of economies of scale are available to us that would directly affect the curriculum or maybe even class size, but would give us a little bit of relief on the expense side?
Maybe Kristen are you thinking about sharing resources?
Go ahead.
I don't know,
Oh, well, I
What
have
we can share.
conversations all the time with people that,
I'll let you share.
I've had a number of meetings with Hanover to have conversations about how we might share some of those administrative services. We've talked about technology, whether we could do some things collaboratively there. And there is ongoing conversations about having their business and HR offices help with our provision of our services, and whether that could be maybe more efficient. I'm not sure but if it will be more efficient, but it may have more depth in terms of protection in case we have, you know, a loss of a person or something. But also, there is some potential perhaps with Rivendell, but it's very sketchy at the moment. But we talked superintendent to superintendent. Are there ideas and thoughts that we can bring back to our boards to try to find areas where we can collaborate and do some of these things? Very hard to make those things happen, but they're on the table and part of the conversation.
Well, some of us remember the days when we were in the same SAU with
Yeah.
Hanover and Norwich.
So there's two
And
sides, right?
That was not a happy time. It's the way I would summarize it. There were some very serious problems with that merger because it was not a merger of equals or nearly equals. Whereas going with Orford, and there was talk at that time of looking at Orford, which would be more a merger or a combined SAU of equals in a sense. But it was also something that the voters in Lyme, and we have to remember, we represent the voters. And boy, I have seen every time we've tried to make a radical change, the voters have blown us out of the water.
I think if you were to, I don't think there's an appetite for merger. I think there's and the relationship between Cornish and Plainfield is more of a contracted service. So it's done by contract, we buy the service. Or we sell the service. In the case of Plainfield, they have the contract for the superintendent and the business manager and the director of special ed. And they sell part of that service to Cornish. So the revenue comes in, but Plainfield maintains the control of that.
You had mentioned, Frank, that there was a challenge or difficulty with the type of things you're exploring. What are those difficulties?
Well, the same as like Dick is bringing up, the fact that communities, we love in our towns in New Hampshire, our local control, we like the immediate service. And it's hard sometimes to get folks to find a way to share some of that, you know, because they worry about those things.
Right,
And you've been through it, I mean, you've gone, we went through Plainfield, went through a separation from Lebanon, and then we went back and contracted for the high school as an area of service. You guys went through a separation from Dresden at some point, you had good reasons, I'm assuming. Usually that comes with a higher cost, but sometimes that's what it's worth it, so, you know, you make those community decisions.
Or sort of
And they are very much community decisions,
a political decision versus an economic decision.
sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, sometimes where you'd look for the service, they don't have excess capacity available to sell to you.
Right, so, yeah,
There was a presentation, I remember in the mid-2010s, I want to say Jay Davis, when he was on the board, did a presentation about the capacity and why we split amongst several tuition schools, is we couldn't be absorbed by some of these schools and have them not increase their teachers and add a classroom and things like that. And the fact that we split actually works to our advantage sometimes.
The
is-
parents, I think
The
the
parents
parents
like it.
also like it,
Yeah.
and having done a study almost 40 years ago, which was the second one that had been done in town, from just almost to a person, everyone wanted the option to send, my child will do better in this school, and I want to be able to send them there.
See, that school choice though, I don't think school choice per se is costing us money. And I think what was shown a few years ago is that having school choice is actually, at that point in time, was actually saving us money. In part, though, that was dependent on the Vermont school districts having lower tuition than Hanover. That's not true anymore. I think in some cases they might be getting higher than Hanover. You know, but we're still potentially saving money because we're spreading our special education needs across different districts as opposed to having them all in one, which would require that we then make an expenditure for those services in that school. But, yeah, I mean, I think one of our difficulties, Plainfield and Cornish and Grantham found a really great opportunity. They're all small schools, and they needed to find economy of scale. Hanover has economy of scale integrated into their own district. They're not looking for it. Lebanon has economy of scale. Orford doesn't, but Orford, now Rivendell is an interstate school district. Their kids, their little kids, their K through 8 kids are in Vermont. They're not actually in Orford. So there's a distance, right, issue. If you're gonna do any sharing where a teacher needs to come back and forth, that's problematic. Today, the district, I don't know what's happening in Rivendell. I don't think Rivendell knows what's gonna happen in their district in the next 2 years. They're talking about making some pretty radical changes because, right, and it's because their costs are so high. And the other thing, when the voters of this town maybe moved out of the Dresden district and they may have been more inclined to accept that cost, that expenditure, it was the late 90s, it was pre-recession, right? And I think when you look at costs historically in New Hampshire and what's happened to property taxes, a lot of the impact that we feel today happened after 2007, right? And it really started to be felt probably 2010, 2011 as the state lost their federal revenue sources and also had their own financial issues to sort of come to terms with, and they started downshifting a lot of costs to the district, and that's happening again this year with special education, right? They don't have enough funds to cover what was once called catastrophic aid. They have a sort of more correct way of, I think it's the special education fund or something now, and you know, and they're not, and basically the head of the Department of Education said, well, we're not even gonna ask the legislators to fill that hole to that. We don't wanna fund, you know, I mean, it really is, essentially, they don't wanna fund it. And I think that everything that happens as costs get downshifted to the local districts, when it comes to public education now in New Hampshire, there's a lot of political maneuvering at play. There's a lot of libertarian thought, there's a lot of the ALEC, like national, you know, things that are happening that they're trying to bring to play to potentially not have public education anymore. You know, and so there's a lot of challenges there, and those I think will be felt, right, by our district and every district in New Hampshire over the next decade.
Another thing is, I use the word diversity differently, but there are a lot of different viewpoints on life and the people in Lyme. And, you know, you have sort of traditional rural families who have been here a long time. You have people who, you know, are high-powered professors from Dartmouth. And the fact that kids can choose different high schools, I think, is very important to people in the town. I know that friends of ours, some think that Hanover is the greatest thing in the world, and other people say my kid would be lost over there. And the fact that you can choose from this thing, I think, makes the town attractive to a lot of people, and I think it's a good thing.
I think it's important to recognize that there's no single solution. That people say, gee, we should get more state money, but I say it's all tax money, it comes from us. Whether the state gives it to Lyme or whether we raise it ourselves with a property tax, it's still our money and it comes out of our pocketbook. The same thing comes when you get the money from the feds. It's raised over a larger area, and then it goes out in little chunks. But every time they take a big pot and they divide it, there's an administrative cost that soaks up at least 10% of the pot. So sometimes it's better if it's all local. And I think one of the things that I always say, Lyme in a relative thing is well off economically. And we're able to afford things that towns like Allenstown, taking an example, couldn't ever think about affording. And if everybody in the state has the same level of schools, this town is gonna get hit bad because we're gonna be supporting the Allenstowns of the state. Because we've got the resources here. So if we just wanna be greedy, that's the last thing we want. Now, Now, it may not be politically, maybe we feel everybody should get the same education. Whether they come from Allenstown or whether they're, English as a third language student in Manchester that's very expensive. Or is here in Lyme where we're, all economically, very similar and very well off. Have supportive families at home. Those all add up to an advantage for Lyme. Do we wanna give it up? No. Every time we go for a vote for something, the answer is no. That's all I can go by.
Do you have some guidance for us?
Do we have any other comments, or shall we say that we don't wanna dive too much further into the politics of funding education?
So moved.
Yes, yes, second that.
I do have one more question.
I'm certainly not done.
All right,
If you
go
thought-
ahead.
No,
Let
go ahead,
Bill
you have the time.
Judy, you gave us this, and we didn't have a chance to talk
Right,
about
right.
it tonight. In terms of schedule, what is your thought? When will we come back to this? And
When we come back to this, I think the school is in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And if they're under a lot of questions, we would love to have some conversation at that point. Or I would encourage folks, if you look through it, especially look at the last page, it's kind of interesting.
Yes,
That it's down to 3.89, but there certainly needs to be a discussion about what's not here now.
right.
And,
That was what I was thinking
If
about.
people have comments, if they'd like to send them to Dina, she will share them with the board. You can be prepared to talk about them either in 3 weeks at the next meeting or the meeting after.
Well, our next meeting is the 8th, and traditionally, that's when we go tear apart the school district.
Yes, but we may not need to. There
In a
may
loving
be-
way.
there
Now,
may
and we may have time to look a little bit at the town, which is why I have that spreadsheet sent out to everybody.
But we will come back to this.
Oh,
Yes,
yes.
we will, we will.
That was really.
And we can't finalize that until we get the money articles, because obviously, the money articles are a high percentage of the town budget in terms of appropriations.
I yield back to those.
Probably, I know. Well, I think Frank asked us for guidance, you can't close the meeting before we give that, I would say. If I could put something on the table, right, this budget is rising by $433,000. Right, we've been pushing on the municipal budget, pushing on the poor firefighters, we're asking for what, 26,000 more? And we're sitting here and thinking like, oh, 433,000 for the school, that's just ducky. It is outpacing CPI by a couple of percentage points. And if there was any guidance that I would see if we could get as a consensus is what does it look like to the school to get to a CPI number of growth as opposed to 4.76, right? And what are the changes the school would have to make to get there?
So I would just ask you to think about that, frame that maybe a little differently, because of that 4.76, only 1.9 of it is actually the school itself, other than the bond. And so we actually brought the regular budget in below CPI. It's just that we have that bond payment.
Although you had,
Yeah, you do
you
have
had 100, at least minimally $172,000 in surplus. And maybe more than that, although you needed that money, right? And so last year, so that was, and I think there has been in years past an argument made, or should we be comparing budget to budget, or should we be comparing actual? You can't compare the actual this budget, because you don't know what it is. But last year, we has a known actual, but we're still comparing budget to budget. So I would argue that the actual increase, or the projected increase here, I don't know what it is, but it's higher than the stated 4.6%, because you had $172,000 left over last year that you didn't use. So
Because you spent
why do
less.
we, like, if you didn't need that $172,000 last year, why do you need it this year?
Well, 60 of it is gone because of the bond payment.
Right, but,
So
you know,
there's
it's just,
100,000
That
of
was
them
the
for
Warner.
number.
So,
Last
So
year I
I
proposed,
a one-time payment.
and it got
Go
restored.
ahead.
But-
Well, I don't have the actuals, I think Kristen's got the actuals, but there were line items in there last year in the 2025 budget that were one-time payments. And I think part of that was the search committee for the superintendent, and then I think you have a list, right, of one-time payments?
I don't have it in front of me, but the
Okay.
other one-time payment, that I'm thinking of off the top of my head is the search committee and the strategic plan.
Right, so both of those were, boy, I'm gonna say at least 57,000 maybe together, and those were taken completely out, so that was a one-time payment in 2025, that's why the numbers look so funny.
Yeah,
Right,
I
'cause in
think you're
their
making
budget.
an argument for me.
No, I know, I'm just saying
So too.
I guess what I,
Just
right.
want you to have the facts.
No, I mean, it's fine,
Time
I
out.
know that, I just wasn't gonna get that granular.
Time out. Last year, what we did at this stage is we went back to the school and we gave them a number to see if they could meet it. And they came back with a whole new budget. And then we picked something in between the first and second. And we went to town meeting and the floor put it back to what the school had asked for the first time, in round numbers. Now, what I think we tried to do with the selectmen is we said, all right, we've got a proposal from you. And what would happen if you had to cut $100,000 out of this budget? Where would you find it? And that might be the question, not necessarily to do it, but to come to that meeting in January 8th and say, all right, if we have to cut $100,000 out of the school budget, and I'm picking what I think would be a semi-reasonable number, where would you cut it? What would get cut? Would you cut the library services? Would you cut the town band if we had one? You know, those are the type of things that I think are the questions that I think is, because I don't think we're in a position to know what kind of special ed is needed by a particular student or anything like that. But I think we are in a position in a budget committee to say, what would happen if you had to cut 100,000? Judy?
Well, if I might, this group gave the select board a 3.3 goal,
Right.
3.3% increase, without any specific guidance. And I wonder, because the bond payments will be in the operating budget going forward,
Right.
if you could take that 3.3% guidance and see what that does to the proposed budget coming up. And the thing that the select board said was, yeah, we made these cuts. When we have the discussion, we're gonna say, this isn't serving the town well, but here's what it is. And I think it would be perhaps helpful for the budget committee to hear that same discussion from the school.
You know, where
Does
would
that
you-
make sense?
What would you have to cut out of this
To bring the four.
to get it down to the 3.3%?
From the 4.7.
Yeah,
You'd have to have no increase at the school level, because you basically, that's
Yeah.
your bond.
Well, all right,
And
take
how
the
do you
bond
do that?
payment
You have to
out
have a
that we
flat, you
already
have to have a
voted
flat,
for.
so let's say, like, we want you to have a flat budget,
Yeah.
a no increase, how would you make that happen? I
Well,
mean, I'll
well,
put one
let's-
thing on the
here's-
table, because I think it is somewhat a bit of a controversy even on the school board, is the academic director position. And what happens with that going forward. I think that people in town have voted on that, but I don't know that we've talked about the financials. And whether that position, I don't think anybody on the school board wants to remove the academic director, but I think that there's conversation about reducing that position below 1.0. And I don't know what the reduction is, but you guys voted on it last night, I think it was 4-3, or whenever, this week or last week. And so 4 people voted to keep it 1.0, and the other 3 would prefer to have at least a conversation about reducing the FTE number there.
So I think it's fair to go with Judy's suggestion of saying, what would we do with the same challenge? Because the bottom line is, it's a budget that we give you the number, or the new superintendent the number, and they manage to that number. How they do it is going to be up to them with the guidance from the board. But I think that's a fair challenge to say, what would we do to bring it down to 3.3? Is that what we said for the?
yeah, 3.3.
Yeah.
now, obviously, you're gonna present things that even the budget committee probably wouldn't go for,
Well, we
to get it that low. But let's see what they are.
Well,
let's not prejudge.
Yeah, I think that's a little.
No, I'm
premature.
I'm just saying,
No, no.
they've got a number of things that are locked in.
That'd save lots of money.
I'm looking at this health insurance that's a contract that's already been negotiated and signed. It's got a 9.9% increase in it.
Yeah.
And people and benefits are the biggest expense. And unlike the town, the school is dealing with a union negotiated contract for most of their employees. And the same thing goes with that bond payment. Those are things that are already been voted on and aren't up for negotiation again. Now, the only way we may be able to get down to 3.83 is cutting something else that the selectmen didn't face with that type of a contract, which is why I proposed what I thought was $100,000, just a dollar goal.
Well, 125 would do what Judy wants. so.
All right, let's see what they can come up with for 125.
I have one other question too, when it comes to the CBA and the scheduled salary increase, like what was year one, year two, year three? Cause we're in year one, with the increase of this budget.
632?
No, this is year 2, isn't it?
I
No,
don't know,
This
you
is
guys
year
tell me.
one.
Yeah.
We're in year one at this moment, this
Yeah.
budget reflects
Well, it'd be year
two.
2,
yeah, yeah.
632? I can't remember.
yeah.
It
And
goes
then-
down.
Yeah, was it highest last year?
This year's,
And
No,
it's going
this
to-
year.
year is
This
the
is
The
highest.
first
First
is the
year of the
highest,
contract
and so
is
next
Yeah.
year.
It
Yeah,
goes
so we
down, I
won't
think
see
it's
as
3 next year,
large
and 3 the year
increase.
after.
Cause that's actually also useful to know. Sometimes I get frustrated because we spend so much time just talking about next year, with the exception of some of the funds, like capital. I'm gonna shift to the town and talk about capital reserve funds and things like that. Like, I would like to think more on a 5-year, 10-year scale, so that we're not confronting, like, conflict necessarily.
We have a
Every
20
year.
years projection that we work
Well,
on.
thank God you're not buying fire trucks more often.
They're in there, push them out.
We could use a little bigger tractor.
No, we'll get them to plow it.
There you go.
There you go, there's a suggestion.
All right, we had somebody,
I-
I'm not saying the budget committee wrote for it, but the comment was, we gave the selectmen, get it down to the CPI of 3.3 and see what you have to cut. Now, some of those cuts may not be acceptable to either of us, but at least let's discuss what those cuts might be.
So, one comment, I would like to think that the fund balance we generated was partly due to good management, because we have really clamped down on how we allow people to spend, and we keep them accountable to the budgets that they give us. And I think it's made a difference.
Oh, yeah, I'm
So,
sure it does.
Which
You
is
know,
great,
that-
I mean, I'm not
let's look at it that way.
criticizing, I'm not
Yeah.
criticizing you for having a surplus, I just wanna I want us to be aware that we had one, and like, and you're presenting an increase
Yeah.
relative to last year's budget, but you're also saying, but we're better managers of money, so you shouldn't maybe
Yeah.
need that
Well, I think that's why, I
$172,000.
think, Jen,
Or
that's why
maybe
you're,
you do.
that's why you're looking at 1.9, and you're not looking at, you know, a 3% budget plus the bond.
Well, Frank, can you also correct me if I'm wrong, but did
That's
we
what-
have, we had a departure of a
We had a
couple-
staff member leave in the middle of the year,
Yeah.
and that was a big piece of it,
Mhm.
a professional staff member, that was,
Right,
right, so that happened, and we also had,
Higher side.
in special ed, we had budgeted for a fairly large amount of paraprofessional help in special ed. And then when it came right down to it, we didn't have to hire all those people. So that was also a big piece of it, so they were in the budget, but then in the end, we didn't need them all, because we didn't have as many IEPs and IEP necessities as we anticipated. So that's also a
Yeah.
piece of it as well.
We can't count on those to happen again.
Right, right.
But it does raise an interesting question. You had a professional staff member leave in the middle of the year.
Yeah.
That left you with money left over, which means that position was not rehired.
It-
Did that have a material academic
it was
impact on the
rehired, but-
children, or
Different
well,
level.
they rehired though, that was,
well, how
Those
then is there
Spanish.
money left over?
Well,
Different-
we're
Well,
being
they
hired
hired
in
this
this
year.
fiscal year.
they hired this
Right,
fiscal
so
year,
there
they
was
did
a-
it last year,
A
and last year they
portion
just,
of the year was then done with, how many
Okay.
Spanish teachers do we have?
well, just the one, right,
the
at the
one.
end of last You did, did you
We
hire
had
a
two,
teacher
and then
last
it
year?
went to one.
Yeah, they lost one.
We lost one.
You
And it wasn't the
We didn't
middle
have
of the
one
year,
for
it
like
was
half the
more
year.
like in March, so it was a
You know,
quarter,
at the lower school,
I think.
but I think Mo picked those up.
Right, well, but I
Some of
mean,
that slack,
look,
but that's where you have the extra money, cause you didn't pay that salary.
exactly, so if there was no material academic impact on the children because someone picked up the slack, then do we need two Spanish
Well, yeah,
teachers
but
in the school?
you can ask someone to pick up the slack for 1 month, 2 months, you can't ask them to pick up the slack as their,
No,
like,
my point is,
long-term
if there was
point,
money
like-
saved because someone left and there was no material academic impact on the children,
But
There
we're saying there
was.
was a material impact on the children, it just was something that could be covered for a couple months. And I think it goes back to, again, give us the number, we'll manage to it.
Yeah, I think that's important, because none of us know the impact of the special ed person that puts whatever category somebody in special ed gets for services. Forget what they call that.
IEPs.
Yeah, but anyway, we don't know enough to do that, but I think turning around and giving, which is why I picked a round number, which is what we did last year
Which was
rather than
roughly
a
1%, yeah.
And we looked at what would have to be cut to get that number. And I think that's a realistic goal to get people. We can do it by 1%. If you said, if you wanna get down to 3.3, it's what,
123.
It's like not that far off.
125,000?
123.
Yeah.
123? All right, let's see if you can come back and see what you would cut, how you would change things to cut it by 123,000. That's a workable goal, you've got a target, you may not hit it, but you can try.
It's a good challenge.
Yeah,
It's a good thought exercise.
now do we agree that that's what we would like to see for our 1/8 meeting?
I think that for the minutes and for people who will look at it, I think it's important to match and say a percentage rather than a dollar amount, because I think it could be confusing, to say, well, you asked for this for the town and something else than a dollar amount.
All right, what's 125 come
You could
out?
say
Well, let's
both.
just say 3.3.
3.3.
Janet,
All
help us
right,
with the
say
numbers.
3.3 and it's the same as the
They can
selectment.
figure it,
They
and it's
can,
not being
I think
misrepresented.
we're not gonna be nitpicky for $100 here and there. All right,
Give it a shot.
we've given them some guidance for what we'd like to see on the 8th.
Yes.
Now, do we have any other business that we have to do? We've gone 3 minutes over what my normal limit is.
I'm hungry.
I think we should wish everybody a very merry holiday, and we'll see you in January.
we have that long?
3 weeks,
Oh
yeah.
my gosh.
You can come if you want.
By myself.
Fist
on the table.
Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Anybody, all those in favor, aye, those opposed? You can stay here and turn out the lights.
Yeah.
Yes.
Miss Greenwood.
What are the green?
Been happening, like, year over year now. At some point I figured, what's that? People will be like, hey, what do you?
Everybody.
You know?
it's the same,
I hate, I mean.
Well, it's the old thing, they complain in December when they get the tax bill, they go to spend it first.
Are you okay?
Well, there are lots of people in town that can afford it, everybody wants to pay it. It's leaning toward the middle you can. Oh, yeah. Compared to 25 years ago. Just look at the composition of the budget committee.
Yeah.
That's right.